Welcome to the ultimate defending tutorial for eFootball 2024, catering to rookies, seasoned players and advanced tacticians alike. We embark on a journey today to fortify your skills, turning you into an unyielding defensive force on the virtual pitch. Mastering the art of defense stands as the cornerstone of every football game. A lack of proficiency in this crucial aspect will leave you vulnerable to conceding avoidable goals, and persistent use of predictable defensive techniques will open the door for adept opponents to exploit your weaknesses. We're going to be covering off everything from the basics, so understanding your defensive controls, to dissecting the strengths and weaknesses of each and every technique. Brace yourself for some savvy tips like executing a flawless shoulder barge without risking a foul. Learn to seamlessly adjust your defensive line, master the offside trap and leverage its effectiveness. But that is not all. I'm going to be unraveling my personal defensive playbook, guiding you through optimal strategies for every single scenario on the pitch. Explore the tactical options with individual defensive instructions and discover the playstyles essential for a robust defense. I'll even spill the beans on my player switching controls and techniques, enhancing your defending ability on the field. Let's talk about the basic defensive controls first, along with how they're supposed to be used and the strengths and the weaknesses. First is the matchup command. This can be activated by holding left trigger or L2 on your controller, and make sure you release sprint when you do press this. Matchup has multiple uses, but the main one for me, it would be for intercepting passing lanes. Make sure you got your player in position and then hold left trigger or L2 to cut out the pass. You'll see Rodri here struggling to cover the passing lane, but a late press at the last second is enough to intercept and win the ball. It's also a good way to tackle players head on too, as this will cause your opponent to stumble, giving you valuable seconds to make your next move when you attack. It will provide your player with an expanded radius for intercepting by sticking his leg out to deny clear and goal scoring opportunities like you would have seen here. When the matchup button is held, it can also be used to block shots with any part of the body. Your player will lunge, slide and throw his head in the way if necessary to block the shot. The radius coverage area is determined by your player's defensive awareness, but the ease of ball recovery after a block attempt is correlated with the tackling player stat and the blocker player skill. So whilst the matchup is my most favoured way of winning the ball in all areas of the pitch, its weakness is to fake shots, causing your player to lunge or slide out of the way, meaning a much easier path for your opponent to goal. So if you're playing online and your opponent is using a lot of fake shots, you will need to adapt and change your defensive method. The next defensive command we're going to look at is the slide tackle. This is where your player will slide across the ground to try and win the ball. A very risky method, as it can lead to a foul and even a red card if fouling someone from behind, especially when through on goal. Pressing the circle on your PlayStation controller or B on your Xbox controller will perform a slide tackle. The slide tackle can be used to take the ball off your opponent's feet or to intercept a passing lane that you can't quite cover using matchup. To take the ball from your opponent easily, you need to wait until they take a touch, and as soon as they do and you're in range, use the slide tackle to intercept. Here I am using secondary press to force his player to sprint with the ball, and this is going to make the slide tackle much easier. Again, I wait for that touch just before using the slide tackle. If you apply super cancel R1 and R2 or right bumper right trigger and press the slide tackle button at the same time, your player will slide in the direction of your left stick and not towards your opponent or the ball. Ideal if you want to cut out a cross or shot manually like you're seeing here. The next defensive tool in your arsenal is the shoulder barge. This is where your player will lean in with the shoulder to force your opponent off the ball, impacted by physical contact and player weight against your opponent's player weight and their balance stats. Therefore, you need to be side by side, shoulder to shoulder with your opponent when you use this skill. If performed correctly, there is a chance you can knock your opponent to the ground. However, if you perform this when you're not in the right position or you come in aggressively, it will possibly lead to a foul. And then there's times where the referee just doesn't see the foul. To perform the shoulder barge, press square on your PlayStation controller or X on your Xbox controller when side by side with your opponent. The next defensive input will force your player to pressure your opponent on the ball. To do this, hold X on the PlayStation controller or A on the Xbox controller. And as you can see in this clip, this is purely to show how my player is closing the player on the ball down with no other input other than X on my PlayStation controller. This defensive command is really useful if your opponent is using a lot of fake shots, or if you're experiencing lag, or if you're playing like this weird broadcast camera angle where you can't quite see if you're lined up correctly against your opponent. Secondary player press is what we're going to be looking at now. By holding right bumper or R1, this will force a player you do not have selected to close down the player with the ball. Similar to the previous command, but much better, as you can cover passing lanes with the player you have selected. The secondary player indicator should be the player that will begin pressing, but for some reason that is not always the case, which I can only assume is a bug. As we saw, it's a great tool to use pressing from the front, but make sure you don't pull defenders out from defense, because experienced players will make you pay and will exploit that using 1-2s and through balls. Make sure it's players chasing back to make the tackle, especially when in your defensive half of the pitch. You can see how I've used it here to pressure the ball carrier, forcing them to go backwards and sideways and eventually forcing the ball out of play. But on another occasion, I could win that and get through on goal. Here I use it to bring a player across, and then again to pressure from behind to make the slide tackle. And you're going to see exactly the same method used online. So these tips can be used for offline and online gameplay, but I will cover the online aspects separately, as the method of defending will change substantially, but the controls and techniques used will be what you've seen so far. Player selection is so important for defending, and the secondary player indicator will be the chosen player if you press left bumper or L1. But what happens if you don't want to use that player? Well, you can use the manual cursor change using the right analog stick to select another player. The length of time that this right analog stick is pushed will determine which player you select. So if you want to select someone deep, you'll need to hold the right analog stick in that direction for much longer than someone who's right next to you. In this example, if I press L1 or left bumper, I'm going to select the player behind the ball, but I don't want to do that. I want to cover the passing lane with the player at the bottom to track that player's run. So I use the right analog stick to select him. But there are two types of options for this type of selection. There's ball orientated or player orientated. Ball orientated means that the right stick player selection from the ball, and the player orientated is the right stick player selection from the currently selected player. I prefer the player orientated, as I can flick between them instead of using long holds to select players further back, but it's entirely your choice. Triangle on the PlayStation controller or Y on the Xbox controller will allow you to charge your goalkeeper out of goal towards the ball. Otherwise, they're pretty much programmed to stay on their line. Neuer has some player ID where he acts like a sweeper, often lurking at the edge of his penalty box. Good for those playing with a high defensive line, as balls over the top can easily be intercepted as he rushes out from goal, but there obviously is the risk that he may get lobbed. When dealing with opponents' crosses, I would always recommend pressing the shoot button to clear when the ball is halfway between the player crossing the ball and the player receiving the ball. A defensive command I rarely use is the standing tackle, mainly because the matchup and the super cancel tackles are far superior with less risk attached. Whenever you lunge, slide or shoulder barge someone, you're always at a greater risk of fouling someone. Double tap X on your PlayStation controller or double tap A on your Xbox controller to perform a standing tackle. Your player will lunge and try to win the ball, but this is best used when facing your opponent just to reduce the chance of a foul. There are a lot of player skills worth having as a defender, and one of those is Acrobatic Clear. This allows your defender to clear the ball at awkward heights. Later, I'm going to provide you with the best player skills and stats for your defenders. Now for some on-the-fly tactical commands you can use during a match. You can adjust your defensive line for a short period of time by holding your D-pad to the left or to the right. This allows you to push them up higher or deeper at the press of a button. I find this particularly useful at goal kicks or anytime the goalkeeper's got the ball, because it allows me to push my defence right up to the halfway line and then easily win the ball, as you're going to see here. The other tactical option is the Offside Trap. Double tap D-pad towards your opponent's goal to bring up your defensive line. I don't even ever recommend doing this when you have pressure on the ball, so you got someone nearby pressing his player. If your opponent has the ball without any pressure, they could play a through ball at any moment and leave their striker in a 1v1 against your goalkeeper. The Offside Trap can definitely keep your opponent online guessing if you catch them a couple of times with it. Super Cancel has various benefits in eFootball 2024, which we will cover in this video, and one of them is the ability to put your player in front of your opponents when the ball is kicked in the air. Super Cancel removes that automatic placement of your players and allows you to override their position to get in front of your players like you're seeing here. It's not much, but it's enough for me to win the header. Here I use super cancel R1 and R2 or right bumper, right trigger with the left down stick to take my players off the in-game rails and position him between the ball and my opponent just to usher the ball out of play. Super cancel will also give your players a speed boost without the ball and a physicality boost when you have the ball, as I proved in one of my other tutorials. It's a great way to win the ball without conceding a free kick too, because you can literally clatter into players as you're seeing here without conceding a free kick. If your player has a significant weight and physical contact advantage over your opponent, you can use super cancel to push players well away from where the ball is going to land, especially from goal kicks. Remember how I said you can use super cancel to charge into players and knock them off the ball without giving away a free kick? Well, here's that example without any other input. Now I want to talk to you about the mechanics in the background you may or may not know about. If you are within physical contact distance of your opponent, then it will weaken his ability to shoot. It could impact the kicking power or the finishing accuracy, so if you can't get back to make that tackle, just make sure you are close enough to make physical contact and then hope it's enough to put off the striker. The other built-in game mechanic you need to know about, and honestly this one makes me cry, is that the players will freeze for a split second when you lose the ball. It could be an interception, a tackle, a header, and when that happens all of your players will freeze. I believe they did this to make it a pure esports game, but for me it's so jarring and really disrupts the flow of the pitch. But you need to know about it because you have to take that into account whenever you lose the ball. So you don't want to lose the ball when you're around your own penalty box. Defending online is totally different to offline. Offline, you know what the AI is going to do on Legend. Keep the ball very well, but become very predictable. After playing about 100 games or more on Legend difficulty, you're going to learn how the AI is playing. Whereas online, it's all about reading and understanding your opponent's patterns of play as quickly as possible. It all starts with the tactics. Getting the formation right is essential, along with the individual instructions, and we're going to go on and talk about that a bit later. However, if your opponent is using a lone striker, just one centre forward, no other centre forwards or support strikers, then I'm going to apply tight marking on that striker. This will allow me to push my opponent back and be the aggressor. I always start with one red bar and as an attacking strategy, and just to set this, you just need to double tap on the D-pad up to activate it. You'll see how high my defensive line is with the long ball counter playstyle, and this allows me to stay on the front foot, and with tight marking applied to his centre forward, I can easily win the ball if he thinks he can build from the man in the middle. Whether you are playing online or offline, player positioning is essential. Try to put yourself in your opponent's shoes and see who you would pass to. Now move your players and position them to cut off as many passing lanes as possible. This will require effective player selection and use of super cancel for that increased speed boost. Now against Legend AI this is extremely difficult, but against an online opponent it's much easier as they're more prone to mistakes. When defending crosses, you have to use your brain sometimes. I realise it's going to take something spectacular to score from this position, so I just position my player with matchup held down, ready to intercept the cross, which would be the easy option. This is what it looks like when you have a player with high defensive awareness, tackling stats, and the blocker player skill. Just look how comfortably he controls the ball after a fierce, low-driven cross using the matchup button. When defending counterattacks, if I can't put any pressure on my opponent without risk of a through ball, I am always going to retreat to the edge of my own penalty box. I generally retreat to the edge of my own box, and then I will engage the player on the ball. Why do I do this? Well, any through ball then has to be precise, and then the control from the receiving player has to be perfect. Otherwise my goalkeeper will hopefully come out and smother the ball at the striker's feet. When you are defending counterattacks, try and identify and plug any gaps in your defence. Watch how I adjust my centre back's position to prevent the through ball to his wide player. If you have plenty of players and coverage of defence in the penalty box, don't be afraid to call for support using the secondary player press, especially if you're facing a 2 vs 1 in the wide area. Now I'll show you some online examples where I'm using the exact same defensive methods. The first two instances here, I'm reading my opponent and cutting off the passing lanes using matchup, but in this third I know exactly what he's going to do, so I use super cancel for the speed boost to get across before using matchup to intercept. I always use attacking instructions on my fullbacks and set them both to defensive, or have 3 centre backs and 1 fullback so you have an attacking instruction available, and centre backs are usually better stat wise for the defensive work than most fullbacks. 2 reasons why I use these individual instructions. Firstly, there's a lot of cheesy or meta formation users out there. You know, the 2 CFs, the SS and a whole player as the ACM just in behind, or the 2 CFs and then you've got a left wing forward, a right wing forward, essentially a 4-2-4. So you can't really afford to be without them, otherwise you're going to get outflanked and destroyed as they pass from left to right or right to left, and you're going to get exposed with that extra man. The other reason is that the crossing ability in this game is pretty weak, and in terms of cross to goal ratio, it's pretty low. You're better off cycling the ball around and creating more from a central area and pull your opponent apart, and you don't really need your fullbacks for that. I just want to point out once more the defensive methods I talked about earlier and how I'm applying these online, getting my players to chase back and get goal side, cut out passing lanes, the importance of those fullbacks being on defensive, forcing them to run out of ideas, then dropping back to my penalty box before engaging. This means it gives him no time to react as he thinks I'm going to just retreat back inside my penalty box. Here I use secondary press to pull my centre back out to meet the attacker whilst maintaining pressure from behind. Normally I wouldn't do that, but here it is safe to do so, and I switch at the last second to use matchup to win the ball. It's worth knowing which strikers you're up against, so always check your opponent's team beforehand. So we know Haaland has terribly low balance, so just get onto him as quick as you can, and he quickly becomes one of the easiest players to defend against. Mbappe, for example, just force him to stop running, cut him off and force him to slow down or turn, and then he becomes easy to tackle. Also consider matching up defenders who will suit playing against their strikers. There's no point playing defenders who are 180 centimeters tall and have a jumping of 70 when facing Collar or Giroud. And there's no point having Harry Maguire up against Mbappe. Also, make sure you have a variety of defenders on the bench so you can adjust. Some who specialise in height and jump, and others who are quick. Very rare to have attributes via all the GP options. Now let's talk about my recommended player stats, player skills, and the playstyles required for your defensive players. Players I can recommend are Van Dijk from Liverpool, Saliba from Arsenal, or Varane from Manchester United in the GP pool. I can also recommend Alaba from Real Madrid because he can play as a fullback, is comfortable on the ball, and has a good range of passing skills to enable you to play out from the back or go long. So you want to make sure you compensate any defender's weakness with another's strength. So what I mean by that is to have someone who is quick and small alongside someone who is perhaps tall and slow. You can't have 2 slow defenders or 2 small defenders, but ideally you want defenders who are both quick and very strong defensively. The important player skills you can't really be without are interception, blocker, and aerial superiority. A nice to have would be acrobatic clearance, as we've seen before. Anyone lacking blocker, interception, or aerial superiority, then I would recommend trying to add that via the additional player skills. Now for the player stats, an absolute minimum for the online play. Defensive awareness, you want that to be 92 and above. Defensive engagement, you want that to be 90 and above. Tackling, 88 and above. Aggression, 82 and above. Speed, 70 and above. And acceleration, 67 and above. When it comes to playstyles, there's only 2 I'd recommend. First for your centre backs is build up. Only build up. Because you want that defensive line to be nice and straight. Then when it comes to your fullbacks, they should be set on defensive, so it shouldn't really matter what they are, but defensive fullback would be my choice if you do not use the individual instructions or you need them for something else. One thing you need to do both online and offline is to track your opponent's player runs. Look at the player's body language and you can see he's been told to make a run after playing the ball backwards, so I track the run with my player, get my angles right and intercept that through ball. I also notice his pattern of play, always going wide then passing centrally. It's so important to read and understand your opponent's sort of methods and patterns as quickly as possible, because as soon as you do, winning the ball is going to become a lot easier and winning games will become more frequent. I was tempted to make a change to shut down his wide players, but feared it was too soon and I didn't want to lose my potency in attack. I needed that second goal and felt generally comfortable anyway with the way I was defending. If he starts creating dangerous chances, then I'll start to think about considering changing my formation and individual instructions. Second half, I applied tight marking to his centre forward to stop him receiving the ball from the wide areas to build his attacks, and it's not too long before I start predicting his moves and intercepting the ball far more. On the 66th minute, he does get a very, very dangerous chance because his wide player has acres of space, and at that point I was like, okay, that second goal might not come for me, and we can change the formation to shut down his width. So I changed it up. I went for a 5-3-2, and I was tempted to opt for a man marking on my fullbacks with his wide players, but in the end decided against it and left them to be set to defensive via the individual instructions. Now you can clearly see I've really shut him down now, and it's really beginning to frustrate him. He's hesitating on the ball, which is allowing me to pinch it from his players. I'm bringing players back, cutting out the passing lanes to his wide players, just doing everything I can to make it a defensive masterclass. He literally had nothing left to offer, and I could tell I broke him as he went on to score an own goal. I wasn't too sure if it was an accident or not, but I'll take it. Then he lost a man to a red card on the 91st minute, and he just, at this point, completely lost his mind. So it was a comfortable 2-0 victory against a very worthy opponent. Now I want to share with you my formation and tactics for new players that's going to allow you to defend comfortably. Firstly, make sure you have a manager who has long ball counter. This doesn't mean you have to play long balls. Just from a defensive point of view, it is the most solid in my opinion. The 4-2-3-1 with two centre backs with the build-up playstyle. The fullback positions playstyles don't really matter as long as they've got good defensive qualities. An anchor man as the DMF who has strong defensive qualities. For the two CMs, you want to have those as box-to-box midfielders either side of that DMF who are balanced offensively and defensively. Someone like Jude Bellingham from the nominating contract pack the other day. The wide players' playstyle doesn't really matter too much. Just make sure they're good at dribbling and carrying the ball at pace. The striker playstyle doesn't really matter either, but a deep lying forward or a classic number 10 might be useful if your opponent plays or applies tight marking. Otherwise you could feel like you're getting pinned back. If you do feel like this is the case, switch to an attacking strategy to push your team forward. Just double tap up on the D-pad to make it one red bar, and that will push your team up higher up the pitch. Now make sure you apply individual instructions to your fullbacks as defensive as attack 1 and attack 2, and this is going to make sure you are very well protected across the back line. The other safe option is the 4-1-2-3, same long ball counter play style, build up with the anchor man, box to box CMs, and then either left wing forward, right wing forward and a centre forward, or you can perhaps opt for a cheesy formation and go with two centre forwards and a support striker. If you find you're not creating enough, you can sub out one of those box to box midfielders for a whole player and move him to an ACM in the middle, just behind your striker. Or you can opt for a creative midfielder as I've done and shown you here. Firstly, if you stuck all the way through this, thank you so much. That means so much to me, as I wouldn't want to listen to me either. That concludes my ultimate defending tutorial. Hopefully you've learned something. Next I'll be looking at some top tier final tournament players and identifying how they defend and if they do anything vastly different. Until next time guys, thank you so much for watching and supporting me. Take care and goodbye.